What's going on, guys? Jason Frausto for TennisUnleashed.net. Today I'm going to show you how to hit an ATP style forehand while simplifying the swing and making the swing shorter. To find out how that's done, stay tuned because it's coming up next. All right, guys, before we jump in, let's just take a quick look at what's considered to be a traditional forehand, right? And that's Denis Shapovalov right here has a very traditional modern ATP style forehand. And just before we start this, a shout out to 12 KGP Tennis. Check out their YouTube channel. That's where all the footage from today is provided from. Great practice footage there. Check them out. Make sure you subscribe. So here's the deal. Denis Shapovalov, right? Traditional forehand swing. Let's walk through it real quick. He's playing here and practicing with Rublev. This is Washington, D.C., I believe. A bunch of traditional elements. Non-hitting hand on the throat of the racket there until he releases. And then as he comes back from this position, he extends a non-hitting arm. It starts to reach out a little bit. It doesn't quite get full extension there, but reaches out. And what we see is the hitting arm right here. This is the important element. And the hitting hand get to at least the height of his shoulder as he brings the racket back and goes through the unit turn. Okay, so again, let's go back for a second. As he's turning his body here, you can see the hitting hand, his left hand, he's a lefty, gets at least to the shoulder height for him or above his shoulder. He'll traditionally, a lot of times he will go above his shoulder compared to some other players on tour, right? There are other guys that don't bring it up as high. We covered Federer's half loop conversion a few years back and I walked through that video. Link in the description below, but Federer changed to more of a half loop forehand. Shapovalov still has the full loop on his forehand. Sometimes, again, he's above the height of his shoulder with his hitting hand. There are a lot of players now that have shrunk the swings down because they realize they don't quite need that big of a swing. But Shapo, great timing, right? And again, hitting hand here, drops the racket. The wrist is in that relaxed position as he starts to bring it down. See, the wrist is not in that upright or cocked position. It's very much in a relaxed position. Not every single player completely relaxes the wrist here, but it's pretty common these days to have that wrist relaxed. And then the racket drives forward. And then we've got contact right here. And then a really nice solid finish. So let's jump into an example now of what you can do as a recreational player, a player at any level really, to still hit an ATP style forehand while simplifying this swing. All right, so we had Shapovalov up on the first clip. Now we're going into a different player, Yoshihito Nishioka, who was a finalist at Washington, D.C. this year. And what's different about his forehand, right? We talked about Federer and the half loop forehand and how that developed for him, 4 to 6 years ago when he had his breaks and came back and still won slams. But what about Nishioka? What does his forehand backswing look like? And what can you learn from it at any level? And especially though, a recreational level. Let's take a look. Nice split step. And that's something we're going to go over in a few videos, but really it's just footwork and basic rhythm. A lot of players, especially at lower levels, lack that rhythm in their feet. They don't move. But look at Nishioka's positioning here, right? Look at how low the non-hitting hand is and the hitting hand right here. So we've got the hitting hand just above the navel, belly button area max, right? And what Nishioka does that's different than a lot of players on tour is as he brings the racket back, he really has no loop. So we've talked about, Shapo bringing the hand at least to his shoulder. A lot of times it's above the shoulder. We talked about Federer having a half loop, and that's where you bring the hitting hand just to about the bottom of your chest. And now we're seeing Nishioka here show us something different, which is a shot where the forehand basically takes no loop. It pretty much goes straight back, right? So kind of a throwback. But the interesting thing about his no loop forehand straight back with the hitting hand is he still hits an ATP style forehand. You say, well, Jason, how's that possible? All the other components are the same, okay? So if we look at a typical ATP style forehand and we compare it to Nishioka, we've got Nishioka here. Racket head is above his hitting hand, right? Non-hitting hand on the throat of the racket. As he comes back, the racket starts and it's pointed to the opposite side of where it's going to be here once he starts to pull the racket forward, okay? So it's pointed off to his left side here, and then as he starts the initial swing forward, right, it's going to flip and it gets into this position right here. And actually, he has a fairly significant drive or flip position where the tip of the racket head, we've talked about this in other videos, tip of the racket head needs to get behind the hitting elbow. And Nishioka gets way back, right? He's really far back with that tip flip, okay? And achieves a very elastic position. So again, from here, he starts to relax his wrist. And then as he starts the rotation of his body here, and the forward drive of the racket, We get to contact, but he does all of these things, has all the ATP components without bringing the racket up, okay? Yes, the racket head is above his hitting hand. That's key, but he's not bringing his hitting hand up to his shoulder or above like Shapo, or bringing it even to chest height. He pretty much brings the hitting hand in a position where it just comes basically here, follow that hand, straight back, gets his tip flip, makes contact, and then finishes the stroke. The reason I find this to be so valuable and so important for so many people, especially at a recreational level, is that technique, yes, is a major component of playing good tennis, right? It's very important, but there's a lot of other things that I see at the recreational level. I'm talking about anybody below 5'0", 4'5". You are typically having issues with movement and positioning and contact, and you can eliminate issues at that level by simplifying your strokes, but still having an ATP efficiency level stroke. I guess the question for most people is, what does Nishioka lose? Does he lose anything by bringing his ATP style forehand straight back versus having either a half loop or a full loop? Let's compare him to Shapovalov, and we'll talk about some of those things real quick. Okay, so we've got Nishioka on the left side of the screen and Shapo on the right. Let's break this forehand comparison down real quick here. And what's the big difference that we see, right? Look at Nishioka here on the left and look at how low the hitting hand is. It looks similar until they separate the non-hitting hand here from the throat of the racket. And at that point, you can see Shapo continues to lift the non-hitting arm up, right? As he starts that larger loop position, and Nishioka has it down closer to belly button height or just above the belly button, basically bringing it straight back. And you say, Jason, well, then what's the point of a loop? If you can still hit an ATP style forehand without a loop, what's the point? Well, it's been proven decades ago that by using a loop on your forehand, right, that when the racket is dropping like this as it's falling, that it's actually accelerating and picking up racket head speed, okay? So Nishioka having an ATP style forehand without any type of loop whatsoever could be missing a tiny bit of MPH on that side compared to a guy that uses either a half loop or a full loop. He still gets plenty of power because his racket comes from this position here, right? And he ends up in pretty much the exact same position as Shapo right here, where they have the tip of the racket head well behind their hitting elbow, but he loses a little bit of racket head speed because he doesn't initiate a loop. If you look at the difference between the height of the racket here, Shapo's is well above his head, and obviously with Nishioka, the racket head is a much different position here, where it doesn't have that height and he's not getting the benefit of gravity, right? And a little bit of acceleration on the drop of that. So as we come forward from here, we can see now everything looks basically identical at this point. Contact also looks very similar, right? You can see the shoulders are open to the net, the hips are open to the net, the body is rotated, and the legs have extended. So initially the legs were in a position where both guys had their legs a little bit more bent, but then from this position here, the legs will extend as the legs go into the contact and contribute to the power of the stroke. And then both guys finish right there. But there's some interesting things that you can learn looking at this footage, understanding the difference between a full loop, a half loop, and now a straight back ATP style forehand, right? No loop. There are essentially 3 different types of takebacks on the tour that are used, and Nishioka is one of the guys that's using a straight back style, but still hitting an ATP style forehand. All right, that wraps it up for this video on how to simplify the ATP style forehand swing by bringing the racket straight back. If you found this video helpful or you feel like you learned something today, make sure you smash that like and subscribe button. It helps this channel grow and bring you more content. I'm Jason Frausto for TennisUnleashed.net. I'll see you next time.